Hello, everybody. Hope you're doing well. Today we're going to cover Chapter 14, Marriage and Family. Okay, let's go and get started. So, what is a marriage? Okay, so a marriage, depending on what your cultural background is, depending on where you grew up, will dictate what a marriage is to you or what it means to you. Uh, so, marriage is like most things when it comes to sociology, when it comes to you know defining people, it's difficult. There's gonna be plenty. There's gonna be multiple different models for what a marriage or what would constitute a marriage. Okay, like I said, everybody can define it differently. What my cultural background is will determine what a marriage should be for me. Right. So, example, if you're particularly devout individual religiously, so if you grew up that way, that would dictate what kind of marriage you will have. Okay, so that's just kind of one of the things that there's kind of two components to it. Really, there's this moral component. So we think about norms, folkways, mores, and laws. We have mores, right, which will be expectations of behavior that have a moral component to them, which means they're right and wrong, good or bad. So, marriage would definitely fall into that for sure. Okay, as far as behavior that is acceptable or unacceptable on an ethical or moral level. So people that are living together should be married, depending if that's your culture, if that's the more expectation and the norm in the society that you grew up in. And there's also the legal component, right? So mores and laws would apply to marriage. Okay, so if you were to get married today, you probably go down to the courthouse, get married at the courthouse. So legally, in the eyes of the state, you are a married couple and entitled to all the benefits that are that are given to married couples. And then and from the courthouse, you might go to a church or some kind of other place, establishment to go ahead and actually take care of or satisfy the moral component, right? So if you're religious, you go to church. I mean, there could be something else, or some kind of other spiritual ceremony that you would do to acknowledge this new union, right, between you and this other person. Okay, so that's kind of what marriages are, right? There's the moral component and the legal component to them. Okay, but what they do is essentially tie people together. Now, there are what I would consider culture universals when it comes to marriages. Okay, and those would be economic cooperation. So if you're married to somebody, for the most part, I'd argue there may be some cultures that this would not apply to, but for the most part, we'll say that there is some kind of economic cooperation. Okay, you and your husband, you and your wife, you and your partner, whatever the model may be, you're living together. Your incomes are not one. So you do well, your partner does well. Your partner doesn't do well, you don't do well. You are now you become this one group, this one entity, right? There's definitely the expectation for sexual activity and childbearing too. So economic cooperation, sexual activity, and childbearing are what I would consider to be kind of cultural universals when it comes to marriage. So no matter what the model is for a marriage, usually there's going to be these involved: economic cooperation, sexual activity, and if you don't want to have children, you still have those first two. Okay. So I'd argue the vast majority of marriages will have these elite, if not all three, at least one of these components. Okay. And what we consider traditional marriages, right? So marriages traditionally would be based on the idea, the concept that this is a sexual relationship, right? That there's a permanence of union between these two individuals, right? That's the whole idea, right? When you marry somebody, this is it for you, right? There is no, you'll forsake all others. This is your person, for the rest of your life, till death do you part, right? That's kind of what marriages are supposed to be, right? This is forever. Like that little picture there, right? Most of you, maybe some of you, might look at that picture and think, I'd never take a picture like that, right? Just think to yourself, look at that picture and think about whether or not you would actually, agree to take that. And if you are a person who says, nope, I would never take that picture, never say never, right? There's always that chance you might find that one person and then boom, there you are, taking pictures like this and doing things and giving into things that you never thought you would. Okay, but that's what happens, right? When people, fall in love and get married. And we'll talk about love as a component for this in a few more slides. Okay. So why do we care so much, right? Why are we even talking about it? Why is there even a chapter dedicated to marriage and family in a sociology book, right? Well, it's in there because it's important. I'd argue that marriage or family, right? The institution of family, and marriage is definitely part of that. I'd argue is probably one of the most important institutions that we have. And I do consider it an institution, right? We're going back to chapter 5 when we talk about socialization. The first agent of socialization that you will encounter will be your family, okay? So historically, marriages are what create a family. Now, when you look at this image here, this is a 1950s kind of definitely a nuclear family. This is the ideal, right? This is the ideal model for a family, or at least what we've been told is the ideal model for a family, right? You got male, female, right? So heterosexual. You got husband and wife, they're married legally, right? And then they got their kids. So, husband, wife, kids, very suburban, very, kind of middle class, nuclear family model. Now, this is an ideal, and the reason why it's an ideal is because I'd argue, for the most part, families today do not look like this. I'd argue families back then didn't really look like this. Okay, there's always, this is, like I said, it's an ideal for a reason. Okay, but as strange as it is to argue that it is an ideal, it's something that, it's ideal. We strive for because it is an ideal, right? If I were to ask you right now, and think about it, for those of you, I'm going to ask you this question: how many of you want to get married, right? If this was a face-to-face situation in a classroom setting, I'd ask you guys to raise your hands. You all look around, and for the most part, and every time I've done this, I'd say at least 80 to 90% of the class would have their hands raised right now. Most people see themselves getting married, okay, eventually. So, and then I ask you, if you want to get married, what type of family model do you see your marriage, would you see yourself having? And most people that would raise their hand and say they want to get married would say they'd want a family that looks something like this, right? You want your husband, your wife, your partner, depending whatever that situation is, right? You want your significant other, whatever that may be, and then you want your family, your kids. That's the model that most people envision for themselves when they think about having a family. Now, that's not always the reality, and I argue a lot of families today don't even look close to that. But it's something we still strive for, right? Like I said, this would be a traditional U.S. family, right? Something I've been told we are supposed to have or want. All right. Moving forward. People today have a broader and more inclusive idea of what family means. So, like I said, the nuclear family model, that 1950s ideal for what families are, I'd argue never really existed in the way that people argue that it might have, right? People like to harken back to the 1950s as this pinnacle for family life, American life, and things weren't great in the 50s, right? Maybe for certain families, maybe for certain demographics, maybe in certain places within the country, things were good for people, but 1950s, tough. It's a tough time, right? For a lot of people. But I don't want to go down a rabbit hole. So let's focus on this, right? So what are the family models? What are these characteristics that separate, modern families from what we consider to be this kind of nuclear family model, right? Single parent with a child, okay? So that's going to be a big one, right? And there's a lot of criticism when it comes to single family or single parent families. This research is going to argue for the benefits of staying together as a couple. There's going to be research that argues against it. I mean, go ahead and do read through a couple of journal articles, right? You can spend hours reading journal articles on just single families and the benefits of them, and the negatives, right? But single parent with a child is definitely one, right? That's not an ideal, right? Most people, when you think of getting married, think of having kids. Like I said, there's the whole idea of this family, this kind of permanence of union. Most people don't go into marriage thinking this is going to end up with me being a single parent with a child. Okay, married couple without children. This is also something that has been around with us. All these things have been around. Okay, single parents have been around. Married couples without children. Okay, uh, children being raised by same-sex couples. These are things that have always been with us. Um, they're just now, at least at a point where I'd argue for they're going to be much more mainstream. Okay, there's a lot more social acceptance of these types of family models. Okay, so this is really what families are. It's going to be all of these things. It's the nuclear family. It's a single parent. It's the married couple without children. Because think about it. What is a family? So say you get married. Whoever you get married to, right? Whoever your partner is, would that not be your family now? Just you and that person? Wouldn't that constitute a family? Do you have to have children in order to consider you and your partner a family? I'd argue you wouldn't, right? It's you and this person, your special person now. That's your own new little family, right? So families as a socially recognized group. Yeah, like I said, this is important, right? Because this determines who or what constitutes a family. So families are usually joined by blood, marriage, cohabitation, or adoption, right? So those are some of the ways that people enter into, families. Okay, you're born into a family, you marry into one, you cohabitate, right? You don't get married, but you live with somebody, and you live with this person for a long time. Just because you're not married, and does that mean that they're not family? Okay. Adoption. You can adopt children. You can adopt people. Family of affinity, right? You choose who you want to be in your family, and I'm sure there's a lot of us that have done that. Okay, so families should form an emotional connection, and they should serve as some sort of economic unit. Okay, and really, what this is just saying is that the people that you're in a family with, or people that make up your family, there should be a strong emotional attachment to them. You should care about the people that you're related to, right? And I know a lot of you probably have relatives that you don't care much about. Okay, people, and I'm just speaking from my own personal experiences. There's some people in my family who I would just rather not deal with. There's no emotional connection to them. Okay, and I have friends that are not related to me through, they're just friends. There's no blood relation. There's no legal, they're not adopted or anything like that. It's just friends that I would consider to be more family than actual blood relatives. Okay, so that's going to be families of affinity or kinship of spirit, right? People with or without legal blood ties, who we feel belong together and define themselves as a family. And I'm sure a lot of you know what I'm talking about. I've had something, or actually currently have something like that. I'm sure a lot of you have friends that you consider family. And that's what this is really talking about, okay? The idea is that people don't have to be married, don't have to be blood related to be considered family, okay? Now, sociologists identify different types of families based on how one enters into them. So orientation refers to the family into which a person is born. Procreation is described as one that is formed through marriage. Okay, I'm not going to focus too much on these. It's covered in the book, but I'm not going to test you on it. Cohabitation. This one we're going to talk a lot about because I think it's important. Okay, so cohabitation is important because, most of us, a good majority of people within the United States, and not just the United States, but people just cohabitate, even though there's going to be some kind of, or could be some kind of sanction for cohabitation. People still tend to do it, right? Now, people do it for different reasons, right? But cohabitation, just to define the term, right, is the sharing of a household by an unmarried couple. So these are two people that are not married who've decided they're going to go ahead and live together. Okay, that is a cohabitating couple. All right, and this has become a much more socially acceptable family, I would argue. much more socially acceptable behavior. Okay, there's not as much stigma attached to people who cohabitate as there used to be, right? And when we talk about what used to be, there's the whole idea that you shouldn't live with somebody that you're not married to, right? That essentially, if you're living with somebody that you're not married to, you're living in sin, right? So that's going to be a moral violation. Okay. Folkway, possibly not a lot of sanctioning happening with the folkway, but there'd be a lot of sanctions, some pretty severe sanctioning happening with, cohabitation as a moral violation. Okay. These individuals, these cohabitating individuals, are less motivated to get married. Some would argue. Okay, so about 39% agree that marriage is becoming obsolete. So there's this idea that people are shifting away from the need to actually get married legally, right? The whole legal component, and morally and spiritually, right? The idea is I don't need to get married in a church to live with this person as a family. I don't need to get married in this, by the state. I don't need the state to recognize my relationship in order for it to be, a family. So there's a lot of people who will cohabitate, and they'll choose to cohabitate based on that, right? They're kind of bucking the system when it comes to, religious, spiritual, unions, and legal unions. Okay, they're just going to go and live together, and that's it. We're a family because we say we are. Okay. The surge in cohabitation is likely due to the decrease in social stigma pertaining to the practice. And I would agree, right? As the social stigma attached to cohabitating starts to lessen, you're going to see more people engage in it, or openly, I would say, but more couples are willing to do this. A lot of people cohabitate, right? And now, one of the biggest reasons people cohabitate, I'd say one of the biggest people, I'm comfortable saying that. One of the biggest reasons would be, I'd say finances. Okay, some people argue it's a trial run for marriage. I don't know about that. This is just me, personally, right? As I'm looking at this, I'm not sure. Well, I guess it could be, right? I guess one wouldn't necessarily trump the other as far as a good reason to cohabitate, right? I mean, people, think about it. Living in Orange County, things are really expensive, right? Apartments are expensive. Just the cost of living is expensive. So if you find somebody, right, you start dating somebody, and you like them enough, right, you're struggling a little bit, would you not be more willing to move in with them, right? Like, you know what, financial situation is not great right now. I'm dating somebody, I like them enough. They seem okay. I think this might work, but let's go in and cohabitate just so I can, you say it's a one-bedroom apartment, right? $1,600, $1,700, $1,800, if not more, depending on where you're at in Orange County. So that's, $1,700, $1,800, apartment split, maybe two ways, maybe, I don't know, 60-40, who knows, however you want to set that up. But you're saving money as far as cost of living, food, things like that, right? That could be very enticing to somebody, right, who's struggling. Okay. And the other idea is trial run for marriage. Some people argue that cohabitation is a good way to get to know somebody. Okay, that you shouldn't just marry somebody without knowing what it would be like to live with them. Okay, and cohabitation is an easy way to do this. Okay, I don't know if I want to say easy, but an easier way. Okay, to do this. You move in with somebody and you get to know. What they're like behind closed doors, right? Are they messy? Are they not messy? How do they manage their money? What are their habits? You get an idea of what this person's like, what this person does when nobody's looking, right? Is kind of the idea. And you have to decide if those things are bad enough that you can't live with, or maybe they're okay. You can deal with them, right? So, trial run for marriage. And I'd argue, splitting financial reasons or economic reasons would be the two main reasons for cohabitation. Okay, it's just my opinion. We can argue on that. We can differ. Okay, so the majority of cohabitating relationships eventually result in marriage. So the argument is, if you can convince somebody to cohabitate with you, the idea is eventually you can convince them to marry you. Okay, so for those of you who want to marry somebody, maybe that's some good news. Cohabitation has little effect on the success of marriage. Okay, so cohabitating couples, um, based on the research, don't have a better shot of staying married longer. And actually, the argument is there's some research that will argue that couples that do not cohabitate actually stay married longer than couples that don't. Um, so I don't know. I don't think there's much of a difference. We'll talk about divorce rates in the United States and what they are. And so at the end of the day, I'm not sure cohabitating before marriage makes much of a difference. Okay. So critics of cohabitation argue that it's a less stable environment for raising children. Okay. Um, I'm not sure how much of this I would agree with, um, but this is what the research is going to argue, right? So why would they be, right? Let's go ahead and look at that. Why would you argue that a cohabitating home is a less stable home for raising children? And I guess the argument would be that a cohabitating situation is much easier to get out of than a marriage, okay? And that's also the same thing when it comes to finances, right? So you move in with somebody, and things don't go well. Hopefully you got the apartment in their name and not yours, and you can just skip out, right? You can send a text message, right? Tell them that's not working out, and then send that text message, and then you're off, right? And if your name's not on the lease, then maybe financially you're not, responsible for that apartment anymore, right? As horrible as it may sound, and I know it does sound horrible, and I'm not trying to be horrible about it, but that's kind of what it is, right? I mean, can you send a text message and get divorced? Like you can send a text message telling your partner you want to get divorced, but that's not going to make it so, right? A divorce is something that takes time, money. I think just starting the process for a divorce is a couple $100. I think it's like $500-$600 just to start the process for a divorce, and that's not counting all the other things that go along with it. So when you get married and you decide no longer to be in that marriage, you don't want to be in that relationship anymore, it's much more difficult to get out of. Cohabitation, much easier, right? If you decide you just don't want to come home one day and you're done, you could be. Just that simple. So maybe that's the argument for why it's a less stable environment for raising children, right? Because maybe with the cohabitating couple, there's less expectation of this kind of permanence of union, right? Maybe kind of got 1 foot in, 1 foot out, kind of situation. Higher rate of breakup, and I'd argue the high rate of breakup could be for the same reasons, right? Most couples will fight over finances, and the most stressful time would be finances and the birth of the first child. So if you're a cohabitating couple and now there's children involved, you get stressed out financially. You introduce a new child into this family model, and you're not ready for it. It's just stressful no matter what. It might be an easier process to leave it would be an easier process to leave if you weren't married. Okay. Now, if you were married, like I said, you still got to go through the divorce. If you're not married, you're just leaving. You're walking out. Okay, and this, the critics will argue, puts women at risk, right? So for women, there's when it comes to single parent homes, right? So you got a parent raising a child by themselves, right? Women are definitely going to, by far, by considerable amounts, going to be much more prevalent than men. There are men that are single fathers, but there are a lot more single mothers, right? So this is why they're going to argue that it puts women and children at risk, because historically men have been the breadwinners when it comes to households. So when a male leaves, what will happen is he'll take the income with him. Okay, now when a male leaves and takes the income with him, it puts the mother and the child at risk, right? Because now they don't have that income anymore. So yeah, that's why they're going to argue that cohabitation makes it difficult, or maybe not the best situation for a child. Okay, for those reasons, and we can go back and forth on this, right? But that's the argument. Okay, now supporters of cohabitation will argue that living together is a private matter, and it really has nothing to do with the state, right? It has nothing to do with anybody else other than the two people who have decided to live together, right? It's just my business. It's my personal business. It has nothing to do with the state. It has nothing to do with my friends, my family, anybody but the person that I have, chosen to be in a relationship with. So that's the argument, right? Meets the needs of a diverse society. So the argument is here that cohabitation allows individuals to be flexible in a society that would require that, right? The chaos that we live in, the world that we live in, right? Financially, you find yourself in dire straits. Boom, move in with your significant other, right? Things get better for you, you move out, right? Cohabitation is a useful tool. Some people may argue, right, for the world that we live in. Okay, this is an interesting concept. I do like this. All right, delayed marriage. So delayed marriage is simply that, right? Cohabitation can definitely play a big part in delayed marriage. So really what's happening now is the age for people that are getting married is starting to rise. So people are getting married, I'm not going to say much older, but older than they used to, right? So, you can think about this, right? Look at your own families, right? Think about your grandparents. How old were your grandparents when they got married? How old were your parents when they got married? Heck, even think about if you have any information about your great-grandparents. How old were your great-grandparents when they got married? So think about your family and the ages, right, that they were when they got married. So for my parents, they were married. Let's see, when were my parents married? I'm trying to remember. Definitely kids by, early 20s. So married, kids, early 20s. So just imagine right now, a lot of you in your early 20s, imagine being married and having kids. Throw that on top of going to school and working and all the other things that we have to do in order to, make it. Okay? So people are getting married later in life. And there are different reasons why people are getting married later in life, and I'd argue they're pretty good reasons. Okay, so men and women get married about 6 years later now than did in the 1950s. I'm arguing this is just going to rise. This is slowly going to go up, right? So for women, it's about 26 years old, and for men, it's about 29 years old. Okay, so that holds true, right? My personal experience, my friend groups, right, that I've seen, that's about right. Late 20s to early 30s, about the time that most of my friends got married, started having kids. Okay, so delaying marriage is a function or the result of spending more time in education, right? You get out of high school, you know the importance of education. And historically, you might have been able to do pretty well with just a high school diploma, right? 1950s, you get out of high school, you start working for a company, you spend 30 years there, you retire, right? And in the 1950s, 1960s, 1970s, I'd argue, for the most part, you could work at one place for, the entirety of your life, your career, your working life, right? And be able to purchase a home, live I'd say a working class up to maybe or maybe even a middle class life, depending on where you're at financially, right? But you were able to essentially own a home, raise a family, do all those things working in one place, right? Maybe the mother as the homemaker. That's something that we're not seeing anymore, right? That's something that's I don't want to say it's gone, because it's not necessarily gone, but it's definitely not at the numbers it was before. Most people now that want to have a family, it's going to be a 2-income household, right? So spending more time in the education system is kind of it's imperative, right? It's crucial. You have to get an education in order to do well. Okay, so if people are spending more time in the education system, college, getting advanced degrees, it's going to put them off, right? If you go straight from high school to college, right, you're looking at 4 years, add a master's program or a PhD program. So you look, depending on the program, you're looking in your late 20s, early 30s by the time you're done, depending on what program you're in and how far you want to go. Okay, so that puts you about 26 to 29 years old. Okay, when you're done with the education and then ready to start looking at moving on from that to maybe starting a family, right? Spending more time in the labor force. This is a big one too. You get out of college, 26, 29 years old, give or take, with your PhD. You want to start having a family immediately, Can you even start having a family immediately? Probably not. If that's the situation, you probably want to go ahead and take that degree and apply it. So you want to go ahead and essentially secure a position in your desired career field, right? And that's going to take some time. It could take a couple of years, right? You're not going to just jump into a position at a company or in the field that you want, for a year and have it locked in. Maybe it takes a couple of years, 2-3 years, right? You're settled in, no longer temporary, whatever the situation may be. Now that you've been there for a couple of years, you're secure enough to start looking to have a family. And there's also the idea of birth control, right? Birth control technology and legal abortion. This is something that's made it possible for women to control their own reproductive, system, their choice, whether or not they want to get married or not want to get married, but want to have kids, start a family or not start a family, right? So this is also going to delay the concept or marriage, right? You control economically what you're going to do based on your education. You control physically what your body's going to do and what it's not going to do, right? It's a situation where maybe economic conditions, uncertainty. These are all things too that definitely delay marriage. And really, what this is the idea that you just can't afford to get married. Okay. So maybe, what is it now? I think what's the average marriage is like $30,000-$40,000. So I couldn't even imagine, right? And some of you probably have a better idea of what a marriage costs. But last time I checked, last time I looked into it, a marriage was about $30,000 to $40,000. So think about it. For those of you who want to have that kind of wedding, right, where you go ahead and get married at the church, you have the huge reception. My friends that were getting married, they had like lists of like 200-300 people. So you got to rent out a venue for 200-300 people. You got to think about the food for 200-300 people. All the things that go into that, right? You're talking 30-40 grand, and then some people say that's on the low end. Okay. For a lot of people, that's just not a reality, right? Even if they want to have that kind of wedding, financially they just can't afford that kind of wedding. So maybe it's a situation where you'd love to, but financially you just can't do it right now, so we're putting it off. So you could delay marriage because you're spending time at school. You can delay marriage because you're working on your career. You can delay marriage because you can control, whether or not you're having children, right? That's something that's up to you. And you can definitely delay marriage because of economic conditions, right? I'm not going to get married right now because financially it doesn't seem like a good idea. I can't afford it. Things are uncertain, right? And this has led to an overall drop in childbearing, right? So delayed marriage has resulted in people having less children, okay? So depending on how you want to see that, how you want to view that, good thing, bad thing, it's up to you. All right, so let's look at some alternative family models, okay? So marriage and monogamy. Married to only one person at a time, right, is the idea. The whole permanence of union, it's me and this other person. This is it for me, right? When you get married. That's just the very nuclear family model type of expectation for what a family is, right? Married to only one person at a time. Now, many countries and cultures, one spouse is not the only form of marriage, right? And this is a cultural thing. If you've never seen the show Sister Wives, you got the image here. You got the gentleman here who's married to 4 women. I don't know. Is that all 4? I think does he have a 5th? I can't remember if he has a 5th wife, but for sure, he's got 4. Okay. So this is a family model, right? This gentleman is married to 4 women. And he is able to do what? If he wanted to, date other women. If he decided that he could financially afford it and he wanted to add a 5th wife to his family, he's able to do that. Okay. This is another type of family. It's a different family model, not one that we would consider to be traditional. Okay. But traditional here, I'd argue in Western culture, United States, other Western countries, I argue it's not necessarily the model, but in a lot of other countries, it is. In about 78% countries or other cultures, polygamy or being married to more than one person at a time is socially accepted. It's actually in some places encouraged, right? It's expected that you would take more than one wife. There are cultures where there are women who take multiple husbands, but those are a lot rarer. Okay, so for polygamy, multiple spouses, it's usually going to be man taking multiple wives. Okay, I'm not going to spend too much time on this. I'm just going to cover it really quick so you're familiar with it. Lines of descent. So lines of descent are important, really depending on what country or what your culture is, as I said. So whatever culture you're born into, the society that you're born into, lines of descent do make a difference, or it can be a very important thing. So kinship or ancestry essentially is who your parents are, who your grandparents or great-grandparents. Essentially, what's your family model, or what's your lineage, right? It can be based on blood, marriage, or adoption, right? So 60%, that number might have changed, of societies, mostly modern societies or modern nations, right, follow a bilateral descent pattern. Okay, so here in the United States, I'd argue we follow a bilateral descent pattern. What that means is we look at both parents. Both parents are important, okay, when it comes to ancestry and descent, lineage, okay? So who your mom is important, and who your dad is important, okay? So I'd argue that's the way we look at family models here, or descent, I should say, here in the United States. Now, unilateral is tracing the kinship through only one parent. And most places with a unilateral descent pattern are going to favor the male, okay? The male's family is what's going to be important, which means everything gets passed around down through the male. Okay, so these would be patrilineal families, right? So patrilineal families are the ones that follow the father's family line only. And this gives males the prestige, it gives them the permanence of family membership, and the females, unfortunately, daughters in these families are only temporary members. This is what they're viewed as. Excuse me. So the idea is, when your daughter gets married, she'll take her husband's last name, and a lot of cultures, she will be absorbed into her husband's family. Okay, so this is a problem in a lot of countries, because what this does is it forces families to choose how they're going to go and allocate resources when it comes to their children. And if resources are limited, then the daughters will get very little of those resources. So if you have limited resources and you live in the culture's patrilineal as far as descent, if you have a son and a daughter, the son's going to get those resources, because the idea is the son carries on the family's name. The son will be responsible for taking care of that family. The daughter will be married off to another family, and she'll become part of another person's family, the property of another person, depending on the culture. So that's the situation. Okay, that's where the issues come in when it comes to lines of descent. So matrilineal families are going to be families that follow the mother's side only, and there are some. I'm just off the top of my head, I can't think of any right now. And then ambilineal, right, which follows either the father's or the mother's side only, depending on the situation. Okay, so that's not bilateral, though, even though it sounds like. So bilateral, both are important. Ambilineal is only going to count one, and it could be a culture where, depending on, I'd say maybe the importance of. So an ambilineal, you can go only choose one side, mother or father's. It'll allow you to do that. Okay, bilateral, you can do both. Okay, family cycle. Well, for the most part, family cycle is really just the predictable steps that people take throughout their their life course, right, if you will. So essentially, the idea is you're a kid, then you're a little kiddo, then you're a teenager, then you're a young adult, and then you're an actual full-fledged adult. You graduate from college, you get your own job, you move out of your parents' home, you don't come back, you start your own family. Like, these are what the life cycle usually is, right? The whole idea of the empty nesters, right? When your parents are, or when When your parents are done raising you, right, and you leave the familial home, your parents are now empty nesters. Okay. Um, let me cover the different one though. There we go. This is something I do like talking about because it's something I argue that is very important, especially for us, right? Millennials, Generation Y, right? Um, Millennials are. I could be wrong. I'm sure the people that will differ with me, but I'd argue that millennials are the new whipping post, right, for society. Everybody loves just taking shots at millennials, right? And this is very common, right? Like stereotypes, right? Stereotypes, if you remember, um, rarely are there new stereotypes created, right? And very rarely do we create new stereotypes, I should say. Most stereotypes are recycled, right, from a previous group that was subordinate, and once that subordinate group gains power, then they use it on a different group. I argue that millennials are this. It's exact same thing, right? So I'd argue that if you look at your parents, right? Well, I'll just think of my parents. So my parents, when they were younger, were probably viewed as lazy, no direction, all the horrible things that all the horrible characteristics that people label millennials with. It's just something that people do. Every generation does that. And as I get older, and as my friends get older, especially when your friends have kids, so you guys might not be there yet, but eventually one day you will, right? Eventually you'll hit an age where the majority of your friends are having kids, right? And if you're not having kids, it puts you in a very unique perspective, right? Because you're still single, unattached, with no kids, but all your friends are having kids, and you see how things change, right? And you see your friends start saying things about their kids that people used to say about them, right? Making fun of the type of clothes that they wear, making fun of the type of music that they listen to, certain cultural things that they just don't get, right? So for millennials, what are some of the knocks against millennials, right? They're entitled, right? I heard that's one of the ones I've heard. One of the stereotypes, or one of the criticisms, horrible characteristics that people consistently use when it comes to talking about millennials, right? That millennials are weak, that millennials are entitled, that millennials are not willing to work hard, they don't know what hard work is, all those things, right? And I'd argue that every single generation has laid that same claim against the next generation that's growing up, okay? But I argue millennials got a tough break. I think we really did as millennials, right? So in 2008, financial upheaval in the United States, right? So you have the housing market just literally just crumble, okay? Rampant foreclosures and bank failures set off a chain of events, sparking government distrust, loan defaults, and large-scale unemployment. This is not, trust me, this is not the society, or this is not the condition that you want your country to be in, or the world to be in, as you're coming out of college and trying to enter the workforce. Okay, this is not a stable economic environment to be in. Okay, so your parents probably did pretty good in the 90s. Grandparents probably did pretty good in maybe the 50s and 60s. Depending. What your age is, what your grandparents and maybe even great grandparents' age was, but the idea is that the economy was much different back then. Things are crazy now when it comes to jobs. The types of jobs we have now are going to be service-based jobs. I mean, we're not going to go into a factory and work for 30 years and be able to buy a house and take care of a family. Most people will change jobs every 10 years. And I'm not saying like get promoted. I'm talking about literally change jobs, something completely different. So for us millennials, it's very difficult for us to plan for the future, right? Because the future is so uncertain for us. Things are expensive, jobs are uncertain. Part-time work right now is ridiculous. Everybody works part-time. Not say everybody, but a lot of people do work part-time, and a lot of companies only offer part-time because it's just cheaper and easier to offer part-time work than it is to offer full-time work, because you don't have to pay benefits, you don't have to pay sick time, vacation time, things like that, right? They can work you a few hours short of full time, get all the work they need from you without giving you anything back. All right, this is not a good place to be as a millennial, right? How are you going to buy a house as a millennial if this is the economy that we have to work with? It's not good. School's getting more expensive, right? I'm sure this is all something you guys are very familiar with and will be familiar with. The cost of education is rising. Maybe we're not getting back as much as we should for our education, right? You get out with a degree. I think the average debt is about 30,000. I think it's about 30 or 40,000 is the average debt for somebody with a bachelor's degree. Okay, that's a tough thing to deal with. You get a bachelor's degree, you go out and try to enter the workforce with a $40,000 dollar debt, looming over you. Like I said, millennials. I think we're inheriting a really bad economic world. Okay, so this generation, born during the early '80s to early '90s, right? So that's a lot of us. Maybe some of you are maybe born a little bit after that. The recession was in full swing. Many were in the process of entering, attending, or graduating from high school and college. Like I said, if you're attending college or graduating from college during this time when everything collapsed, like I said, this is not a place for you. You're not going to get out of college and hit the ground running and find a great job. It wasn't going to happen because those jobs weren't there. Employment prospects were at historical lows, and they still are. Large numbers of graduates were unable to find work. This is still the same thing. Hasn't changed. Sometimes they're moving back in with their parents and struggling to pay back student loans. This is us, millennials. Right? This is what we have to deal with in Generation Y. And the problem with this economic reality that we have to deal with is it prevents us from moving through the stages of what people would consider to be adulthood. Okay, that's why that's why the big knock against millennials is that they're lazy. They don't want to work hard. They live with their parents. They're defective or deficient in some way because they're not able to reach the stages that people would argue they should have reached or should be reaching at a certain age, right? We're going to base what's happening now when it comes to life stages for what we consider to be adulthood with, life stages of relatives and families in society, from 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. It's not the same world, not the same environment. Nothing's the same. Okay, not even close. So I'd argue it's not fair to say that or to do that. I mean, when I know in Santa Ana, I have relatives that purchased a home in Santa Ana during the 1970s, and when they bought property in 1970s in Santa Ana, I think they purchased a home. One of them, I think it's my aunt and my uncle purchased a house in Santa Ana. I want to say for like $60,000, $70,000. That was in the mid to late 70s. $60,000 house. And now a house in Santa Ana, depending on the house, you're talking the very, very least, probably, and this is something that you'd want to live in. Something that's basic, no frills. You're probably talking like $500,000 to $600,000, maybe $700,000, right? Depending on the lot size. So 1970s, house in Santa Ana, $60,000. Today, house in Santa Ana, pushing $700,000, maybe $800,000, depending on where you're at in Santa Ana. God, there's houses in Santa Ana depending on where you're at. You're talking over $1 million. So $60,000 in 1970s to $1 million today, right? So good luck to us, right? For those of us who want to buy homes. So, like I said, the traditional cycle that people argue we should follow as we age has been stifled. Our growth has been stifled through the economy, I'd argue. It's not as simple as just going out and working hard and getting a job, and accomplishing things. And like I told you guys before, I had a job, almost 10, 15 years ago, where I was pushing baskets for almost $11 an hour, and What's minimum wage now? I think it's like $11, $12 an hour. Like they're pushing for 15, right? And I hope it makes it there, but think about it, right? $15 an hour. Where does that put you? So if you're working $15 an hour, 40 hours a week, you're probably, depending on your dependents and whatever, how much taxes you're paying. Let's just say you're probably making $2,000 or a little bit under is what you're taking home. Okay, so at $15 an hour, 40 hours a week, you're probably making $2,000 or less, just under $2,000, right? What's an apartment right now in Orange County? And even a cheap apartment, you're talking $1,500. So there you go. Your $2,000 a month on $15 an hour is gone. You got $500 for the rest of the month for food, utilities, car payment, insurance, everything else. Like the cost of living is going up, and our wages are not rising to meet them. That's an issue. It's a huge issue, right? And this leads us to this poor little individual here, right, with his PhD coming back into his parents' house. This is called the boomerang generation, right? We are the boomerang generation, millennials, right? We're recent college graduates for whom the lack of adequate employment upon college graduation often leads to a return to the parental or the familial home, right? So you got people with PhDs moving back home, just drowning in debt. I have a friend that graduated with I think he did a master's, only a master's, not a PhD. He got a master's from a private university. He's doing okay now, but it took him a while. He moved back home for a bit, but I couldn't imagine being in your mid to late 20s, getting out of a master's program. I think he's in his mid 20s when he graduated, and he owed over $100,000 because he went to a private university. So mid 20s, $100,000 student loan debt sitting over your head, and trying to get out there and make it on your own. It's going to be tough. It can be very tough. So tough that you're going to have to move back in with your parents, right? And this is the knock, right, for millennials, that they're not going through the stages or the life stages that we argue they should be going through, right? Because that's what previous generations have done, right? Previous generations, high school, you graduate, you get out of the house, you go to college, you get a job out of college, and you go to work, or you don't go to college and you just get a job and you leave the familial home and you start working and you start your own life, right? You leave the home and you take care of yourself, right? You do it on your own. Not to say that people today don't do that, but I'm arguing that it's much more difficult to do today than it was for previous generations, okay? All right, so Hennings developed 5 milestones that define adulthood, and really what they are, the things that we've been talking about, right? Completing school, leaving home, becoming financially independent, marrying somebody, having children, right? That's kind of the progression for us. This is what we expect people to do, right? And depending on when they get this done will determine how we view them, right? Completing school, you have a time frame for that, right? Leaving home, definitely a time frame for that as well, right? Becoming financially independent, getting married, having children. When do you want to be doing this, right? For most people, and this is going to change, this will vary, but for most people, by their late 20s, early 30s, this is when this is happening, right? And like I said, the age for that, because we're delaying marriage, it's slowly moving up. But, I'd say by the time you're 35, I'd say this is where it's going. By the time you're 35, you should have all these things squared away. And if you don't, there's something going to be, society will argue that there's something wrong with you, right? You're deficient in some way if you haven't completed these steps. And that's why people knock millennials the way they do, right? Completing school, right? It would be a luxury, I'd argue. And I argue it is a luxury. It's a luxury to be able to go to school and not have to worry about anything but being a student, okay? And for those of you who don't work and are just going to school, take advantage of it. Take advantage of that opportunity and do the best that you can. And for those of you who do go to school and also work, then you understand the struggle, right? It is difficult to juggle these things, right? And for those of us that have worked and work full-time jobs and have full-time school, we realize what a luxury it would be to just be a student. Okay, so completing school is difficult when you have all these other things that you have to take care of. Life happens. Living situations change. You have to get a job. You have to work more hours. The more money you make, the more money you spend. It's one of those things where you lose sight of school, right? So completing school, not very easy to do when you just can't be a student, right? Leaving home, difficult to do, right? Financially, can you afford it? Becoming financially independent, right? It's a difficult thing to do, especially in especially with what's going on right now, right? We have the whole issues that happened in 2008 with the financial collapse, the mortgage industry collapse, and now we got COVID-19 going on. We got record high unemployment. We have a lot of issues. It's going to make it much more difficult for millennials and people in Generation Y to reach these milestones, right? Marrying, having kids, that's a lot. Okay, it's just taking us longer to do that if we ever get there. And what's going to happen is, and where we're seeing this happen, is that these milestones that people define, or that what we argue define adulthood, are changing. Okay, we're going to go ahead and redefine what it means to be an adult. So I think millennials and Generation Y will change what adulthood is. Okay, some people argue for the better, some people argue for the worst. We'll just have to wait and see. And that would be the impact, right? Sociologists wonder what long-term impact the generation situation may have on society. That's what it's going to be. We're going to change what it means to have a family, change what family is, all those things. Okay, now we've talked about single parents, okay? We kind of mentioned those already, so we're just going to run through it real quick. So single parents on the rise. Like I said, single parents is something that's always been around. I have a friend, they're in their mid-70s already, and they're in their mid-70s, and they grew up. They grew up in the South, the Midwest, when they were kiddos, and they remember seeing all kinds of things. They remember segregated restaurants. They remember all that, and they also remember being the child of a single parent, a single mother, and what it was like to struggle. Okay, so single parents have been with us for a long time, but the numbers of single parents are slowly starting to rise. Okay, so at this point now, this is probably old, it's probably gone up with them, but you're looking at 20%, 27% of children, 23% live with or 23 live with their mother, and 3% live with their father. Okay, so those are pretty significant numbers, right? Extended family, we see a lot of this. Okay, so extended family is a family structure that is not just parent are responsible for taking care of the kid. It could be a situation where there's aunts, uncles taking care of kids. It could be a situation where, and this is another family model that is definitely on the rise, grandparents taking care of grandchildren when the parents are not available or not around, okay? We're also seeing the rise of same-sex couples once again. This is the result literally of well, I don't want to say it's... Same-sex couples are definitely on the rise. Now, I don't want to say that, because society depends on where you're at. And then this is why I'm hesitating on this. Depending on where you live within this country, you will see this more often. The numbers are going to change, right? So pretty much anywhere along the coast, West Coast, East Coast, you're going to probably see a lot more same-sex couples. If you kind of move into other parts of the country that are much more conservative, you're not going to see this. But the numbers themselves are definitely on the rise, even though there's large portions of the population who still disagree with this. But still, there will be the social stigma is definitely it's much more socially acceptable. Okay, within the country, and especially in certain areas. Okay, demographics for same-sex is going to be excuse me. Same-sex couples are not very different from opposite-sex couples, and what they're arguing for this is it's the same issues. You got two people that are married, two people that are a couple. They're raising kids. They're going to fight about finances. The kids are going to stress them out. Like the issues are, I'd say, exactly the same. It's just a family. It's a family. whether it's a heterosexual family or not, it doesn't matter what it is. It's a same-sex couple. It's still a family. The same issues are there, right? All right, staying single. Okay, the staying single is going to be the result of the issues that we talked about when it comes to millennials. Okay, we're seeing a lot more of this happening. Okay, so for millennials, what's happening is marriage is no longer, I'm saying not so much a viable option. It's definitely not a viable option for a lot of people that are millennials. It's definitely an option that people are starting to question um, the benefits of. Okay, so the idea is, and this is a movement, right, of people who've decided that they're going to just stay single. Okay, it's a new option. So the things that have been happening to them, things that have been happening in our country, things that have been happening socially for the last couple of years. I'd say at least last 20, last 2 decades maybe, have set forth in motion um, the idea that maybe getting married isn't the best idea. That maybe getting married isn't the right option for me. Maybe having kids is not an option for me. Okay, maybe just staying by myself, me, my family. I'm gonna redefine what a family is. Okay, and that's really what's going to be the result of everything we just talked about. Okay, so it's going to be a new option, right? So this is it. These are old. This is old figures. 2010, 99.6 million unmarried individuals over the age of 18 in the United States. That's a lot of people that are not married, accounting for 44% of the total adult population. So individuals that are single or individuals that are never married are found in higher concentrations in large cities and metropolitan areas. Okay, so we do live, well, Santa Ana, Orange County. It's a metropolitan area. It's a large population. LA, huge population. So Southern California as a whole, pretty big population, huge population, I should say. And we're gonna have a lot of people that are single. Why they're single, that's gonna vary, but a lot of people choosing to stay single, right? So men and women report social pressure to get married. This is true, depending on your family, depending on the, well, it's not only just family, it's also friends, media. There's always this push to get married, right? We see movies about people that are judged, for not being married by a certain age, and what's happening is that there's a pushback. So the pushback is marriage is not for me. The movement's called going solo. Now, there's one thing that you need in order to go solo and do it right. And what that is money. People who choose to stay single are individuals who can financially have the ability to make that choice, right? So if you want to live in Southern California and you want to buy a house, you want to have a middle class life, and you want to stay single, you are now responsible solely for maintaining that life. You can't rely on another income, right? It's just you. You're staying single. You're not marrying. You're not cohabitating. You're by yourself, and still want to have this life and living that kind of middle class life. You have to make a lot of money. Like, you have to be able to bring in the bucks, right? To be able to do that well. So that's the one caveat, right? You have to have money to do it. Now, there's the social stigma, right? There's sanctioning for this, for staying single, right? Men get it, women get it, but I'd argue women get it much worse than men. Men who stay single are bachelors, right? Silver-haired foxes, right? These are men who, decided not to get married, and they're not viewed the same way, right? There's not the same type of stigma attached to it. For the longest time, George Clooney was, fit this category, right? George Clooney, and like I said, never say never, right? George Clooney said he would never get married again. I think he was married when he was really young, but he never get married again. He was single for a long time, and he finally got married again and had kids. But the idea was that he stayed single for a long time, and it was okay for him to stay single for a long time. Right? There was no stigma attached to, George Clooney, not being married. God, look at all the, if you care about this, right? Look at all the reports we've seen about Keanu Reeves, right? Everybody's so concerned about Keanu Reeves and who's dating, who's not dating, but you know, he's single until recently, right? He's not married, but Keanu Reeves has been single in Hollywood for, I'd say, decades, give or take, right? And he chooses to stay single, and there's no sanctioning for that, right? Do women get the same luxury? The argument is no. When men stay single for a long time, they're bachelors. And when women stay single for a long time, there's going to be a stigma attached to them. Unfortunately, it's not good. You know, women are going to be called, you know, spinsters, old maids. You know, there's a whole crazy idea that you're going to be some, you know, cat lady. You know, you're not going to, by the time you hit 35, if you're not married, you don't have kids, you're going to start, you know, adopting a bunch of cats, and that's just going to be you, right? Men don't have this. You know, there's not an equivalent to this, you know, for men. I'd argue maybe the closest thing would be, you know, like a basement dweller, right? The not, you know, men that, you know, don't leave the home and stay with their mom and live in the basement, right? You live in your parents' basement, but that's really it, right? You know, and then that kind of knocks almost like it's a financial knock, an economic knock against a man who can't support himself as a man. But you know, if you can support yourself as a woman, right? You're fully financially, you know, you're as a woman, you've moved through the stages, you know, of what we consider to be adult, to be financially responsible for yourself. You're just choosing not to have kids. Well, you're going to get knocked for that. Excuse me. You're going to get criticized for that, right? And some of you may have heard this, maybe not directed at you personally, but maybe other relatives. I've had friends and family who've, you know, I've seen this happen. And for those of you who have seen it yourselves, you know, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. You know, the whole question is, are you seeing somebody? Are you dating anybody? Oh, you're dating somebody? When are you going to have kids? When are you going to get married? Oh, you're not dating anybody? You're not married yet? Don't worry. You know, you'll find the right person one day, right? You know, you'll find the right one. So for women that are single, it's one of those deals where, don't worry, it'll happen for you one day, right? And that pretty much the argument there is that you are not complete as an individual until you're married. For women, right? For men, they can be single and, you know, no kids, none of that, completely unattached, going solo, and there's no social stigma to that. But for women, it's much more difficult for them to be single and remain single as a choice and avoid those social stigmas, okay, from family, friends, and society as a whole. Right, divorce and remarriage. Ooh, here we go. So divorce is common and accepted in modern U.S. society, right? In 1960, divorce was generally uncommon, affecting only 9% of every 1,000 married persons, right? So it's pretty low. That number more than doubled to 20% by 1975 and peaked in 1980 at 22.6. So really where we're at right now, I think right now we're about 50%, give or take. So 50% of marriages will end in divorce. That's really where we're at right now, okay? Those are horrible odds, right? Like, they really are. 50-50. 50% chance it's not going to work out. That's it. So the decrease in divorce rates can be attributed to two probable factors, right? The first is in the increase of age at which people are getting married, and increased level of education among those who marry, both of which have been found to promote greater marital stability, right? So, divorce is pretty high still. Now, those two factors there, but the argument is that when people wait to get married until they're older, that it makes for a better marriage because those individuals have essentially cycled through the life stages, you know, of adulthood successfully. Okay, it's not a situation where you jumped into those life stages, you know, in your early 20s. Not to knock anybody who has done that, but it's just difficult. So if you've gone through the stages, if you pace yourself through the life stages, you get married when you're older, the likelihood that the marriage will work increases. Um, Increased education obviously goes along with that. If you're going through the life stages, more education means you probably have more money. You're more financially stable. You're not fighting over finances. You're probably once again, it'll decrease the likelihood that you'll get divorced, right? You got those things going for you. But those things are still there. They never really go away. Those issues that tend to lead to people to getting divorced, right? So young people are choosing to postpone or opt out of marriage. We've talked about this, right? The whole going solo thing. Those who do marry with the expectation that it's going to last. And this is the idea, right? Here in Western culture, the idea is that you marry somebody that you love, right? I fall in love with this person. We're going to marry them, or we're going to stay together forever, right? Other cultures, the marriage will be based, like an arranged marriage, will be based on the idea that this is the best fit for this person. Love, that comes later. But this is a financial decision, right? So this is the best fit. This person's going to financially support you. This person's going to be, your equal, not so much equal, but your, I'm trying to think of the best word, not so much equal, but they're going to complement you, right? As far as your culture, your type of family that you have, the expectations for your family. So an arranged marriage it's not about love. It's about finding the best fit for those things, for a family. Not about love. And here, that's a kind of a strange concept, right? Most people that get married here are going to argue that you get married to somebody that you love. And you do that in spite of all the red flags that financially it's not going to be a success. Right? But you're going to go ahead and love yourself through all that. Love will fix all that. So financial stress is going to be the number one cause of divorce, right? So people with a weak asset base, right? So people that don't have savings, people that don't have retirement plans, people that don't have money in the bank, right, are 70% more likely to get divorced after 3 years than couples with at least 10,000 assets, okay? Now, as horrible as it sounds, 10,000 is not that much on the grand scale. Now, don't get me wrong, 10,000 is still 10,000, but when you think about assets, homes, savings, retirement plans, 10,000 is not a lot. But 10,000 is enough. 10,000 is enough to keep you married, right? So, with the number that low, what this tells me, at least my interpretation of it, is that we're doing so bad economically, financially, that 10,000 is going to be the number that makes or breaks you. So how bad are people doing? Where they can't, as a whole, their base isn't at least 10,000. That's bad. Like I said, we're not doing well right now. Okay, as a country, right? We're not doing well when it comes to, maintaining our the middle class, right? Our middle class dreams. Not even close. So this is connected to factors such as age, education level that correlate with low incomes. We've kind of talked about this, right? You get married when you're younger. You kind of rush those life stages. You don't go to college. You don't set yourself up in a career. You're not going to be as prepared to deal with the stressors of a marriage, okay? And the most stressful phase for a marriage, other than the finances, which is kind of always there. Finances will always be something that families or married couples will argue over. The better the financial situation, the less arguments there will be, but it's still an issue that you have to contend with. But the most stressful phase for a newly married couple is the birth of the first child, because what that does is completely changes the dynamic of that family, okay? And as people get older, values and life goals do change, okay? People grow apart, Think about it. You get married, you have your kids, you raise your kids, you're empty nesters, and maybe you realize that we stay together for the kids. Maybe now that you're empty nesters, maybe you decide that maybe, like, I've seen this. I've literally seen this. I've seen families where the kids move out, and after a couple years, dad wants to go back, somewhere else where he was from, maybe a different state. I'm not going to give too much information because these are people that I know. So what happens? Let's say you get married, right? Let's say you get married from somebody from another country, right? And a lot of you may A lot of you may understand what I'm going through. So this little scenario I'm going through, right? So say, look at your parents, right? Say your mom or your dad was born in another country, and they came here for the opportunity, right? So they came here, they worked, and now that they're retired, you know what? It's expensive to live here. It's fast paced. I'm just tired of it. I could take the money that I have here and retire in a country of origin, or even retire in other states. I have relatives that have done both. I have relatives that have gone to other countries for retirement. I have relatives that literally uh, move to other states for retirement. Okay? And what happens if one spouse wants to move and one spouse wants to stay, right? What if my retirement goals and dreams, means me moving to the desert, right? And my wife's retirement goals and dreams is her moving away to, the snow or something, just as an example, right? You got two different life goals now, right? You got two different sets of values. That could end a marriage, right? A lot of things going on with marriages. Very tricky, very complicated. People grow apart or not. Okay, and now in the United States, like I said, about 20% of marriages end by separation, dissolution, divorce within 5 years. Those are scary numbers, folks. So within 5 years, 20% of marriages will end. And at 20 years, half of marriages will end. So after 20 years, pretty much you're looking at, like I said before, about 50%. So 50% of marriages will end in divorce at some time, right? And that sometime isn't too bad. 20 years? Now 20 years is a long time, right? But is it really, on the grand scheme of things, in a lifetime, 20 years, that's, you have a kid, 20 years, that's a 20-year-old kid, they leave the nest, boom, divorced, right? You go do different things now, right? Now couples could divorce. Now there used to be two types of divorces, right? There used to be would be considered at-fault divorce, right? So divorces used to be much more difficult to get or to obtain, right? Nowadays, the only difficulty with getting a divorce is really just how much money and how difficult the divorce is going to be as far as splitting up assets, things like that. Maybe one person doesn't want to get divorced, so they can make it difficult for the other person to get divorced. There's a lot of things. A divorce could take years, okay? But getting a divorce is easy in the sense that you can just say, I want to get a divorce, and just how long is it going to take? Now, there used to be what's considered at-fault divorces. Now, what an at-fault divorce was the idea that you have to find or prove that there's a reason for you to no longer be or forced to be in that marriage, right? And this is kind of something that most people aren't familiar with anymore because it's not something we deal with anymore, right? So essentially, a couple could divorce only if one or both parties claimed in court, and you have to prove this in court, that the other party in some way, shape, or form was at fault for ruining the marriage, right? And the ruining the marriage could be anything, right? Not anything, I should say, but it could be a few things. It could be infidelity, right? So you go and cheat on your husband, you cheat on your wife. Now your spouse can say that because you were unfaithful, this is grounds for a divorce. You're at fault for the marriage dissolving, right? It could be a situation where there's abuse, physical, mental, abuse. It can just be neglect. It could be a situation where you take somebody's money, so financial. So say you empty out your significant other's bank account, doing things like that. You could argue that could be grounds for a divorce. Okay, but nowadays when people get divorced, they're just going to go ahead and cite irreconcilable differences, right? So essentially, at this point, we were just saying that we no longer get along anymore. We need to just be separated. And really, you don't need to provide any more reason other than that, okay? All right, so we're going to get into some heavier topics. Just heads up, right? We're going to start talking about family violence or domestic violence, or what we consider IPV, which is another term, which would be interpersonal violence. Okay, so violence and abuse. Abuse can be, well, we'll just cover what abuse is first, and we'll start going into some of the more finer points of it. So abuse can occur between spouses, between parents, a parent and child, as well as anybody, any family member within a household. Okay, so aunts, uncles, nieces, nephews, grandparents, grandchildren. So any kind of any kind of abuse that takes place within the setting or the context of a home. Okay, and we could argue would be domestic violence. Okay, or interpersonal violence, right? The frequency of violence among families is difficult to determine. The reason why it's difficult to determine is because people just don't report it. Okay, the issues with this kind of crime, because it is a crime, is it happens behind closed doors. Okay, and some people might not even realize that the things that are happening to them actually are abuse, right? And abuse could be many different things. Okay? It doesn't just have to be physical. Okay, it could be emotional abuse, even just simple neglect. Okay, so for domestic violence, like I said before on the previous slide, characterized as violence between household or family members. So that could be, in this case, you can argue for spouses, but it could be anybody within a household. Okay, includes unmarried couples, individuals that are cohabitating, same-sex couples. So sociologists have created the term intimate partner violence to kind of focus on this. Okay, so what this is arguing is that violence that takes place between two individuals that are in a relationship, right? And that's really what the important part is in the context of a relationship. So if just an example, right? So if I get into a fight with another male, right, and this male is just my friend. Okay, so I get into a fist fight with a male. He's my friend, right? We're not in a relationship. We're not in a romantic relationship. It changes, right? So I'm getting into a fist fight with a male friend of mine. Police show up. I'm bruised. He's bruised. I don't want to press charges. He doesn't want to press charges. It could end just right there. And I've seen situations where law enforcement gets involved and they end a physical and a violent confrontation that way. I've literally seen two neighbors get into a fist fight. Officers show up and pretty much tell the men that, because both men want to press charges, but the officers told them, well, if you press charges, you're going to spend the weekend in jail. It was a Friday night. Do you want to spend all weekend in jail and then wait till Monday to go see the judge? One neighbor said no. The officer went and told the other guy the same thing. The other guy said no. So pretty much that was it. You don't want to press charges. He doesn't want to press charges. You guys go back into your houses, and that's it. Situation done. Now, these are two males that did this, two neighbors, right? And they were throwing blows with each other. They're physical injuries, and nobody wanted to press charges, and that was it. But if those two males were in a relationship, that would be different. That would be IPV. Okay, so any kind of abuse, any kind of abuse that takes place in the context of a relationship, it could be intimate personal, intimate partner violence, and that changes legally what it is, and it moves towards a letter of the law situation as opposed to the spirit of the law. So spirit of the law will argue that officers have discretion as far as what they want to do within a certain situation, and letter of the law argues that officers have to act. So if they go to a home and there's two individuals there that are in a relationship and there's visible injuries to one of those parties, usually what will happen is somebody will go to jail. It's like somebody's getting arrested, okay? And I know those laws vary in how they're carried out, but that's kind of the idea, right? This changes things considerably. So women, unfortunately, are the primary victims of IPV. So you're looking at 1 in 4 women have experienced it in some way, okay? Now, interpersonal violence may include physical violence, sexual violence, threats, intimidation, emotional abuse, essentially all these things. It doesn't have to be just one or the other. Usually, if it's one of them, it's all of them, okay? So you're not physically, if you're sexually abusing somebody or being physically violent with somebody, the the idea, the concept of threats, intimidation, and emotional abuse are all tied to that. Okay, and when it comes to IPV, often starts as emotional abuse, and then escalates to other forms of or combinations of abuse. Okay, now this wasn't included in the textbook, but I feel that it's important, so I'm going to go include it. Okay, I'm going to talk about this. So this is called the cycle of abuse. Okay, so this is usually how most abusive relationships will function. Okay, so what you have at first would be considered the honeymoon phase. Okay, so the honeymoon phase is the idealized and romantic phase of a relationship, right? So this is where everything's still going smooth, right? The individual who's the abuser is still being nice, still being romantic. Everything is still fantastic. Abuser makes promises. Now, the abuser make promises comes a little bit later, right? So the honeymoon phase is the start of a relationship, or could be the start of a relationship, but then it shifts, okay? So you start dating somebody and they're perfect, right? That's the honeymoon phase. And then you move down to tension. So tension is essentially that, a period where there's a building tension between you and the abuser and the victim, okay? So the abused partner feels growing tension and stress. Victim tries to control situations and avoid their partner's anger. Feels like walking on eggshells. So I think I'm familiar with the term crazy making, but I believe you guys may be familiar with the term gaslighting. Okay, that's a more popular term, or more, it's a more popular term, but I'd argue it's the same type of behavior. And really what that behavior is, crazy making, is putting a person in a position where there's no winning. Okay, so it's something along the lines of, like, if you're in a relationship with somebody, nothing you do is right. Everything you do is wrong, and you're waiting for that person to kind of just lash out at you, criticize you, right? So it could be something along the lines of, your significant other comes home from work, right? Just example, and you're supposed to have dinner made. Okay, you don't have dinner made. Boom, there's issues there, right? Whatever those issues may be, verbal, physical, whatever they may be. Okay, so the next day you have dinner ready, but you didn't make the right kind of dinner, right? You didn't make the right meal. Boom, issues there, right? So the next day, it's one of those things where no matter what you do, you always lose, okay? And you're putting, essentially what it is putting a person in a situation where they're constantly in fear of abuse. Criticism is abuse. If you're constantly criticizing somebody, that's emotional abuse. You can tear somebody down that way. Okay, so that's a tension building phase, right? The whole walking on eggshells. And then you have your explosion. Okay, explosion is going to be the actual abusive event, right? And some type of abusive behavior. And this is going to be the shortest stage of this whole cycle, right? It's going to be, whatever the physical abuse is, okay? Hitting, something along those lines, right? That's going to happen quickly, okay? And then you're going to leave the explosion phase and move back to the honeymoon phase, right? And now everything goes back to being ideal, romantic. At this point now, the abuser makes promises to never do it again. The abuser makes promises to get help, to go to counseling, to do whatever it is. The abuser is going to make whatever promises they need to make to get you to stay. So this is the honeymoon phase, and then we'll go down to the tension phase again, and then that ideal behavior will start to slowly wane, and then you'll start building in tension, and then the tension will build, and then there'll be an explosion, and then you go back to the honeymoon phase. Okay, so this is the cycle of abuse. Now, what will happen, given enough time, is that the honeymoon phase portion of this will disappear. So if you spend enough time with somebody who's abusive, eventually what will happen is they'll stop with the honeymoon phase, because at that point, there's no need for them to do the honeymoon phase anymore because you're not leaving. There's a situation where you can't leave, and I'm not saying you're not leaving because there's always that criticism, and it's a horrible criticism for people that are being abused, that why don't they just leave? And it's nowhere even near being that simple. Okay, but for the abuser, he's taken the relationship to a point where they no longer have to provide the honeymoon phase, the promises. That person they're confident that you're not leaving them. Okay, so then it's just tension and explosion. And that's what the relationship becomes. It's a constant tension and explosion. All right, so continuing with this as far as abuse, child abuse. Now, child abuse or children would argue are this, I would argue some of the most vulnerable, or would be considered a vulnerable class or helpless when it comes to abuse. Right? There's not much children can do. There's not a lot of the children have autonomy. They can't leave a familial home. Right? Not to say that it's easy. I actually say it's very difficult for a spouse to leave an abusive relationship, but a spouse can leave. Right? They're not a child. They're not under the care. The person that's abusing them isn't like a legal guardian. For children, their abuser is their legal guardian, or could be their legal guardian. So that's a huge issue for children. Okay, so child abuse children are among the most helpless victims of abuse, along with, and it's not on here. I'm not going to talk about it too much, but children and elderly. People forget about it, but elder abuse is just as bad, if not worse, than child abuse. There's a lot of elderly people who are being victimized, and just like every other situation, they're victimized by members of their own family. So the statistics are 3/5 of child abuse reports are made by professionals, including teachers, law enforcement personnel, and social service staff. Excuse me. The rest are made by anonymous sources or relatives or parents. So this is people pretty much calling in and calling a report to Child Protective Services, right? You see something, like if you're a mandated reporter, if you work at a school, there's certain places or certain professions where you are mandated as a reporter. If you see something, you have to report it. Okay, so that's a way that it gets reported. All right, so child abuse may come in several forms. Okay, sorry about that. The first form is neglect. Now, this is the most common. So 78% of child abuse is not simple neglect, but just literally neglect, which means children aren't being provided with food, clothing, adequate shelter, things that they need. Okay. The second form, at 10%, would be actual physical abuse. 7.6% would be sexual abuse, psychological mistreatment, medical neglect. Okay, would be another one. So if your kid is, example would be like not taking your kid to the dentist, right? So your kid gets a really bad tooth infection, right? Not taking kid to the dentist would be or denying them medical service would also be a form of child abuse. Okay, so children suffer from a combination of these forms of abuse, and the majority of offenders are parents or other relatives. Okay, so you guys watched the video, you guys remember this, of Jean, the young girl who was kept in a room. That's a severe form of child abuse, severe form of neglect. So for her, it would be neglect for sure, right? Because they locked her in a room for 13 years. Physical abuse, definitely. I'd argue physical abuse, being strapped to a chair during the day and then being placed into a cage at night, I'd argue would be physical abuse. Sexual abuse, they did not mention sexual abuse when it came to Jeannie. Psychological mistreatment, I'd argue most definitely, being isolated from the outside world for 13 years. Nobody in your family is talking, like literally just isolating a child in a room for 13 years. That's got to be probably one of the worst forms of psychological abuse and mistreatment I've ever seen. Medical neglect, for sure. Jeannie, how old was she? 13. She was the size of a 6-year-old, if I remember correctly. So for Jeannie, as far as child abuse, she hits all these except sexual abuse, and that's something that we're not sure of just because they never mentioned it. Okay. So when it comes to child abuse, all these are a factor. And another thing too, though, child abuse, all these things here do play a factor for child abuse, but they also play a factor, and these are all characteristics of elder abuse too. Individuals who are elderly are neglected. There's physical abuse, there's sexual abuse, psychological mistreatment, and medical neglect. So children and elderly individuals who are no longer able to care for themselves suffer. I'd argue pretty much at the same rates. The only thing that elder abuse would have that abuse of children doesn't have is financial abuse. So individuals who are elderly will be abused financially by relatives, and this means essentially other relatives in their family essentially taking stealing money from them, whether it's cash or credit cards or getting access to bank accounts, things like that. That's another form of abuse that the elderly have over a child. But other than that, I'd argue it's almost identical. Okay. All right. So that's it for marriage and family. I'm gonna go ahead and post this right now, and if you guys have any questions, go ahead and let me know. Send me a message through Canvas, preferably. Have a good day. Take care.